Hey, y'all. I'm about a minute early, I think. So, thanks to everyone that's joined. Sometimes I get a little button pressy happy. But yeah, welcome to the last Believe in Serverless live stream of 2025. Really sneaks up on you, for sure. Let me see if I can get my chat window up here. Awesome. So I'm joining you all from lovely suburban Portland, Oregon. So it might be a little dark in my office because this is the dark and sad time of the year. All right, let me get my screen up here. So today I'm going to chat AWS anti-patterns that will cost you later, and more importantly, how to fix them. And as I am talking with my slides, feel free to interrupt me. I'm going to do my best to follow the chat, but if I do miss something, because it's a lot of screens and a lot of stuff at the same time, forgive me. I can catch your questions or comments or things that you have to add at the end. This is widely about my experience, and your experience might be different. So that's the coolest part about doing a stream like this, because we can get other perspectives. And if you're watching on the replay, feel free to comment in the YouTube with your experience, so someone else may be able to learn from you. Let me get my screen up here. Awesome. Yeah. So AWS anti-patterns that will cost you later and how to fix them. Oh, hey, Carlo. Good to see you. Yeah, of course. Carlo's a former person on this stream as well. Always welcome back. All right. So yeah, let's start with a little bit of story time. Some of this might sound familiar to some of you, some of it may not. A lot of us have been there. You spin up a few AWS resources just to test an idea, just a quick fix. And before you know it, you're managing a production system that's held together by manual deployments, undocumented decisions, and just a prayer that nothing breaks on a Friday afternoon. So if that sounds familiar to you, this is likely the talk for you. I've picked 5 common AWS anti-patterns that I've seen working at various early stage startups. So that's kind of the scene for this. Those of you who are in enterprise, feel free to chime in with your experience as well. And if I see it, I'll hit it to show it up on the screen. But here's 5 things that I narrowed it down to that I've seen between jobs over and over again. And this isn't really meant to, shame former places that I've worked. This is just meant to more so communicate that building real software can be really messy. And a lot of times we, rush to LinkedIn and all of that to share our successes, but we don't always share our failures and what we learned from them. So that's kind of the tone of this. But anyway. Yeah, so brief intro of me. I'm an early adopter of AWS serverless. If you use AWS and you've seen Infrastructure Composer in the console, or maybe if you've used CloudFormation Visualizer, the new one, which is new and improved, I believe, as of a year ago. That was part of what the folks at Stackery and myself started building before Stackery joined AWS. So it's super cool and humbling to say that I built something and my code is in actual AWS services. But yeah, beyond that, if you look at my LinkedIn, I'm a multi-startup veteran, always been an engineer. So sometimes senior engineer, sometimes founding engineer, sometimes engineering manager. Hey, Daryl. We've got Daryl from Canada here. Nice to see you. All right, so let's jump into the ANSI patterns that I've seen, and then feel free to interrupt, or maybe even at the end, I'd love to see if you have any to add to the list that you've seen. So number one for me has been using ClickOps instead of infrastructure as code. And to kind of level set, when I say ClickOps, I'm meaning you're clicking around the AWS console to create your resources. And it's super tempting to do that, to test things out. You just log straight in, the buttons are right there. Even the AWS official documentation sometimes will encourage this. And sometimes getting started tutorials will recommend this. Sometimes tutorials that I have written have recommended this. So I'm not innocent either. But here's in general how it's worked for me at startups, where someone has usually rogue ClickOps something. So we'll just call him Bob to protect the innocent. But let's say you have a coworker named Bob. He clicks through the console and creates a bunch of resources. Super fast, he got it done. And he's off to the races and working on other tasks. And this is usually fine and dandy for a little while, depends on how business critical it is. But a lot of times there's going to be a time of reckoning when others on the team are either needing to add to what Bob built, or maybe a customer reported an error and Bob is out on vacation and they need to troubleshoot what's going on. And when someone like Bob clicks through the console, it's then their responsibility to make sure that they're documenting what they clicked, in what order, and the settings they chose. And I've seen lists of like PDFs or Word documents that had pictures of the AWS console and where to click. And it's great until AWS updates the console look. Very painful to update that. But yeah, usually this generally just kind of turns into a bad time for everyone involved. It's bad for Bob's teammates because unless they were sitting there watching him, they will not have the level of understanding that he has of how that system was ClickOps. And then it's not great for Bob because he wants to go off and work on other things, and he doesn't want to be spending time updating documentation. It is easier with generative AI for sure, but yeah, you're still making sure things are updated. So instead of that, I would recommend using infrastructure as code. Infrastructure as code is a way that you can programmatically provision your resources. Historically, it's mostly been with YAML, but a lot of the newer IAC frameworks will let you use even TypeScript, Python, a programming language of your choice. And in AWS land, the most common ones that I have seen have been AWS CloudFormation, AWS SAM, a serverless application model, which is a superset of CloudFormation with some extra resources. I've also used AWS CDK a fair amount if you want to write in TypeScript or Python or whatever other languages they offer. And then beyond AWS, I've seen HashiCorp's Terraform a fair amount out in the wild. But I'll stop there for now because I'll be talking about different frameworks forever. Apologies if anyone is a vendor of those watching this and I missed yours. Feel free to comment in the comments on the recording. We'll make sure you get your recognition. But us as devs, we love to sit around and argue about, writing code, writing YAML. This framework's better than that framework. Personally, I believe the best IAC is using one. So make sure you chat with your team and use one. And ideally, you're going to be using the same one because context switching can be pretty expensive. But yeah, I got into this a little bit, but infrastructure as code has lots of benefits. You have documentation of what's provisioned through the code. It helps with speed. I will say with the caveat that when you first start, it will feel a little bit slower, but that's not exactly the point. The main point is being able to have consistency, being able to consistently deploy the same thing across various AWS accounts, across various regions. If your thing breaks and you need to completely delete it and re-upload it, you'll have that level of consistency. And then major bonus, that it helps with disaster recovery. So if you don't have a disaster recovery plan yet, I would definitely recommend getting one. And usually infrastructure as code is a big part of that, because being able to quickly recreate what you had can be helpful. Yeah, Ricky says he likes to use CDK and SAM. Yeah, those are great. Yeah, I've used a lot of these. Yeah, and like once you use one, like they'll kind of have similar themes to them. So for sure. But yeah, so I would say my ideal scenario, and keep in mind there's a little bit of nuance with this because sometimes different organizations have different rules and expectations, but I would say without any other information, I would say my ideal scenario in a startup, especially if you're using AWS serverless with a lot of moving parts, I would recommend that each developer has their own AWS account. And you can emulate AWS locally. There's a lot of tools. They've gotten a lot better over the years. But I personally have the belief that nothing fully replicates being able to just deploy it to an account. And the great part about this is if I deploy something and I completely mess it up, my coworker Bob is just chilling somewhere else, working in his sandbox. So I'm only messing things up for me. So like I'll make my changes, I'll experiment, deploy to my account, things look good. Then we have that artifact that we can put through code review. So it might be a YAML file, it might be HCL, might be TypeScript, could be whatever that framework is. Coworkers should be reviewing it, providing comments just like they would with code. Ideally, they're also deploying it to their sandboxes to make sure. Once that looks good, we are headed out to approve it, merge it, and deploy it to a pre-production account. So usually at places that I've worked, this would usually be an AWS account called development. So let's get to the anti-pattern number 2 here. Having a single AWS account instead of multiple. So what I've learned out in the field at various startups is this can cause some problems. At first, it seems innocent and fine, but it's pretty easy to accidentally overwrite someone else's work. We were just talking about infrastructure as code. I could CDK deploy the same stack that my coworker's trying to deploy at the same time if we're doing it in the same account. Not enough isolation. A lot of times you want your production workloads to be fully separate from, your sandbox where you're playing around and experimenting. And I've run into this a moderate amount, hitting account quotas. So AWS accounts have an account-wide quota for various services. A lot of times you can request a quota increase. Sometimes it's annoying because you have to wait for that. But personally, I enjoy the alternative to dealing with that, which is just create separate accounts. I would recommend having multiple AWS accounts with CI/CD at your organization. And AWS helps out with this a lot if you're kind of more on the like the SysOps management governance side with a service called AWS Organizations. You can create an organization, designate an AWS account as your root, and then you can either create or have more AWS accounts added to your org. And Yeah, it's really great. You can set up consolidated billing, monitoring, management, and remember those like individual developer sandbox accounts. It's great for billing because then you can see if someone didn't spin down like a open search cluster or something like that. Not necessarily yell at someone, but just so you're aware, and then they can learn from it as well. But yeah, on top of that, I would also recommend doing CI/CD. I'm going to kind of hand wave that a little bit in this talk. That could kind of be its own thing, but continuous integration, continuous delivery is the way that you can more programmatically run tests and validation against your code, even before you merge it in. And then once you merge it in, it will automatically deploy into other AWS accounts. So yeah, this is a great point from Daryl. Big one with not using infrastructure as code is abandoned AWS resources that really start to cost a lot of money. Yes, I have definitely run into that for sure. But yeah, with CI/CD, you can get faster deploys, faster rollbacks, and I usually like to set up notifications as well. Historically at startups, what I've done has been Slack is usually like the central place where people gather. So I would have a channel that sends deployment notifications so everyone can be aware of what's being deployed and things like that. Yeah, Mike makes a great point as well. You can also set up budgets on each development account too through, I believe that's through AWS organizations. Yeah, that is a fantastic point. But yeah, I feel like my ideal order here would be, individual developer sandboxes like we discussed. Then that you have a change you want to submit, it goes through code review, just like application code would. Then once it's approved, you're going to merge it. It should auto deploy to a pre-production environment. We usually call it development at my various places. And then the engineer that made those changes that were merged should be testing those changes on the development account. The main reason why I like to keep these separate is because the sandbox account is a playground where, that individual that owns that account can do whatever they want. And sometimes that account can get a little messy, whereas development is meant to be like a little cleaner than that. So yeah, we could do this as well. Another thing that we could do too is ephemeral environments. Yeah, I haven't included that in my ideal order, but yeah, especially for things like CI, you could also spin up an ephemeral environment, test it out, make sure it looks good, and then spin it down. Yeah, that's another idea. But yeah, then usually like I'll have some like another pre-production account. Sometimes we call it QA. Sometimes we call it user acceptance testing. Sometimes we call it staging. Usually this is a place where a lot of times I'll have like a product manager that's not an engineer that needs to test something, or maybe they have some early adopter users that are testing something in, beta, like this isn't released yet. And then once that looks good, we move it into production. And another thing I haven't included is you could also use feature flags as well. So if you want to test something out but not expose it to every user, you could have feature flags too. So number 3 for me, anti-pattern, is not thinking about high-level architecture. And I know as software engineers, individuals, it's super easy for us to just pull a ticket, and then that's what we are super hyper-focused on. But I think it's really important that we work to see the forest from the trees. Both are very important. But in the past, I would say with AWS Lambda in particular, at a lot of startups, and I don't mean this is like a Lambda hating thing at all, but a lot of times, sometimes people only know Lambda. And when Lambda's your hammer, everything's a nail. and there's lambda, lambda, lambda everywhere. I think it's important that, sometimes we take a step back and look high level, where's our data flow? What is our goal here? What does the whole system look like? How does this little part fit into the system? And I think it's super important that we are able to maybe zoom back first and then like slowly zoom into what we're building. And then it's kind of like, bad explanation is like the drawing the owl meme. Yeah, but yeah, and Daryl's got a good point here too. Back to the AWS org. Yeah, I did not mention Control Tower. Control Tower is really great for being able to easily spin up new AWS accounts, and you can delete them when you're done. So whether that's ephemeral or like you're just testing a feature and that test is done. We've used Account Factory for Terraform as well, along with Control Tower. Yeah, it's all really good stuff. But yeah, a way with my teams that I like to navigate being able to see the forest from the trees is if someone is making a really big change, like they're replacing a very significant part of the system, or maybe they're creating a whole new system. I tend to like to mandate a technical design document. And usually what that looks like is a Google Drive, because most of my companies have been based off of Gmail. We'll just do like a Word document, write down everything about the system, include some diagrams, include some trade-offs. And once that looks, good as a draft, share it with your team. Give them a few days to asynchronously comment on it. Because no matter how senior you are or how long you've been doing this, I guarantee you're always going to miss something. And having extra sets of eyes can be helpful. And it can also help with collaboration. If someone knows something about something that you don't know, and it can be helpful to your solution. I've learned so much from these types of conversations. But also too, like it's really good to, even if someone is like so new to the company that they don't feel like, they're qualified to comment, it can be helpful to individuals like that as well, because they can have that high level view of how the thing works and the intention and the trade-offs. And then later on, when they need to add a feature to it, they'll already know how the thing works. But yeah, TDDs all the way. I think I have a pretty decent template that a former coworker shared with me. I'll need to see if I can find that and share it in the Discord with his permission. But anyway, yeah, number 4 for me is not thinking about observability. Anti-pattern if you're joining here. So lots of times, it's like you run code and it just works on your machine. And you're not really thinking about what it's like to troubleshoot in the cloud or on a distributed system. I've also been guilty in the past of creating things like unit tests for my Lambda handlers. Those unit tests run perfectly on my computer. Then when I deploy them and they're fully integrated, it doesn't work. So unit tests can be good, but just know to take them with a grain of salt because they don't always reflect reality, because sometimes that can cause an issue with, the unit test passed, so this is fine. Not always the case. But in general, yeah, I would recommend that you test your changes in an AWS account just to see what observing it looks like. Do the thing that you are implementing, see how easy or hard it is to trace it. Oh yeah, this is a good question from Mike. Some cases where you found that a unit test passes but fails in AWS. Past me had created CLI commands against an administrator access on my laptop. And like that Lambda was talking to S3 and it worked fine because I had local credentials. But then when I deployed it, the Lambda execution rule did not have the proper permissions. I'm trying to think of some other examples. For me, it's usually been environment based. So things like a parameter or a secret are missing or different. Permissions are different. Has anyone else run into anything with running locally and then deploying? Nah? Okay. But yeah, overall, I would recommend that, do the tests and things like that, but definitely deploy in your sandbox, especially if you're doing something serverless, because the good/bad thing about serverless is there's a lot of moving parts to it just to make sure that it works, in isolation, but also end to end. And I would recommend just kind of thinking about all three parts of observability, not just logs, but also things like metrics and traces. Yeah. Yeah, stuff like permissions and envars, things that are environment specific for sure. But for things like logs, metrics, and traces, AWS offers a lot of these services natively. There are also some wonderful observability vendors out there. In general, at most places that I've worked at, we would kind of use a blend of the two. Like for monitoring this, or for logs on this monolithic server, we might use New Relic for reasons, but for individual Lambdas, we might just look at the CloudWatch logs or things like that. Personally, I would say pick a plan and use it. Use what works best for you. Yeah, works on my laptop. Your laptop is now the AWS data center. It's true with the Mac instances now, I guess, if you're on Mac. I don't know. But yeah, my last one here is an anti-pattern that I've seen has been folks not thinking about security. And this could easily be its own talk. It's actually historically been its own conference with AWS Reinforce, RIP, which I guess it's now part of reInvent. But yeah, so I'm just going to tell you about a few things that I've seen and curious to hear what some of you all have seen. But starting off with credentials. With AWS, you can log in via the console, username, password usually. And then the other thing is your CLI access. So access key and secret access key. So you can use various SDKs and other tools like CDK. One anti-pattern that I've seen here has been folks log in, they create an IAM user for themselves, then they generate the hard-coded access key and secret access key. And to me, this is an anti-pattern because those are long-lived credentials. You could accidentally commit them. Somehow they could accidentally get in the hands of someone nefarious. And yes, you can deactivate them, but that time between when they are, stolen to when you realize, that could be the time that someone logs in and has a Bitcoin miner running up your AWS bill, which is very frightening. So instead of that, I would recommend using IAM Identity Center. I think historically it was called SSO. But yeah, along with AWS organizations, which we talked about before, it works really great. You can use it on a single AWS account as well. I have mostly used it with organizations, and being like the DevOps person at a startup, it's really wonderful because you can ideally provision users based off of some other system. So like when Rippling creates all the new accounts for a new employee, They probably will create like a Google Workspaces user. You can connect that via SCIM to create a new user in IAM Identity Center. I've done that in the past. And then when the person leaves the company, you just have to delete the Google Workspaces user, and then it percolates up. I would highly recommend tying it with something ideally, but if you can't, you can create the user in IAM Identity Center, and then from there you can create various roles that individuals can assume. You can give them access to all the various AWS accounts in your org, because very rarely does everyone need access to everything. And yeah, it's been pretty great. I've enjoyed using it. So IAM Identity Center, definitely, even for personal stuff, because your access key and your secret access key are short-lived. And that's depending on how long you set the session for. So yeah, usually what I've done has been like maybe 8 hours, because that's about the length of a workday. So folks don't need to relog in throughout their shift, but your mileage may vary. That's adjustable. There's also the new AWS login. I've admittedly not used that yet, but it looks pretty cool. Has anyone used that yet? Yeah, it's like an AWS CLI thing where you just type AWS login, and then if you're logged into the console, it will take those credentials and store it in your .aws files. Or it will prompt you to log into the console if you're not. Yeah, it looks cool. I need to play around with it. Yeah, it looks like no one else has yet, or they don't want to admit to it. But yeah, another security thing that I've seen has been using star permissions for everything. So this is an example of a policy statement where the individual or the principal that assumes this role would have full access to S3 in the account. For something like this, how I would say this would look better would be tie it down to the specific actions that individual or other service needs to do. Also tie it to the specific S3 buckets that it needs access to. I believe it's an AWS term, but it's least privilege permissions. So that's kind of what we all should gear towards. So that just means give the item that is assuming that role the least amount of permissions that they need. So they just have what they need to do their thing, and then they're done. Yeah, this may be homework for all of us to try out AWS login. It looks cool, but yeah, I can't really speak to it because I haven't used it yet. But yeah, so to recap, these were my top 5 AWS anti-patterns that I have seen throughout my career at various companies. And I think the important part about all of this is to just be aware that these are things that start out innocently, but could really snowball into something that can really slow you down from shipping or doing meaningful work. So it's really important to be aware and to just make your adjustment before it becomes too painful. And yeah, I think you all got this. Again, I'm Danielle, and if you want to connect, I'm in the Believe in Serverless Discord, and my home base is my website, danielleheberling.xyz. I've got all my social media stuff there if you want to connect. But yeah, let me take my screen down here. Yeah, Weather by Scott. These are all things I wish my younger self knew when I first started. I'm trying to go through my stuff and redo everything I did with ClickOps, starting to use multi-account. Yeah, it's definitely a journey for sure, but I believe it's a journey worth going on. Most definitely. Does anyone else have any anti-patterns they may have seen pretty commonly? Yeah, what choices that you found out as this probably isn't a good fit for serverless? I think for me personally, the biggest part was thinking I could use Lambda for everything. There have been lots of times where it would invoke and it would be running for longer than 15 minutes. That has been a big issue for me at various places. Trying to think of other things. Yeah, that's probably mostly it. Another thought might be I personally haven't run into this a lot, but mostly building like full stack web apps. It might be different for different types, but I've also heard from other folks some issues with cold starts and latency regarding that. Could possibly be an issue. But yeah, your mileage definitely may vary. I also think cold starts are kind of the boogeyman of serverless haters too. So I do want to caveat with that. Yeah, here's another great anti-pattern. Don't skip a quick read of the relevant service quotas for what you're building. Yeah, most definitely, especially if it's like a newer service and may not have quotas that high. I have firsthand run into issues with Bedrock, quotas that were not adjustable at the time. And then we were just kind of like, I don't know, what do we do? But luckily, in more recent times, they have upped their capacity. So, yeah, Yeti starts. We'll call them that from now on. Awesome. But yeah, I'll do my other spiel at the end here. I have some notes that I'm reading from, just so I don't forget. Oh yeah, one more question here from Trevor. Do you have advice on how to test serverless apps locally without mocking everything? I wish I did. Yeah, that is a very challenging thing. I'm honestly not sure on this one, Trevor. If anyone else in the chat has advice, or if anyone in the Believe in Serverless Discord, I believe we have a testing chat. So I'll offload that and say, I'm not really sure on that one. Yeah, I usually just kind of deploy it into my environment because I've gotten so frustrated with things not lining up properly. But that doesn't mean there's not a better way. Oh, yeah. Yeah, local stack. There is local stack. At Stackery, if you're using SAM, I think also if you're using CDK, you could do like local invoke as well. That is mostly tied to Lambda, though, and very specific. But yeah, you're running the handler code locally, and then it's talking to remote resources. And I believe they fixed it, so it will assume the role that the Lambda assumes, because that was one thing that we changed with Stackery with our CLI, and then AWS copied us. So it's always a good thing. Yeah, Ricky says he tests layers locally using unit tests, and then to deploy remotely to test end-to-end. Yeah, that could be a good way to go about it. Yeah, because there's definitely like multiple parts to it, and you want to make sure each part is tested. Yeah, it could also just be like how you set up your code. So like you could extract anything not Lambda handler related to another function, and then you could just test those separately as well. Yeah, tons of ways to do it. We're definitely beyond the time where you could just spin up like an Express server and run it locally. Although that still exists, and definitely no shame on that. So, right tool for the right job, I think. But yeah, shameless plug at the end here. If you're not already in the Believe in Serverless Discord, Feel free to join us. Everyone of every level is welcome to join. Our only expectation is that you follow our code of conduct. If you don't, you will be booted. But otherwise, yeah, everything is fair game. Every level of question could be very complex, very super specific, or it could just be, hey, I'm learning about Lambda. Do you all have good resources? You can go to believeinserverless.com, and there's a link there for you to join. There's also a short link too. If you go to believeinserverless.com/community, that will also bring you directly to that Discord invite. And this is our last stream of the year. And we definitely would love to have speakers. So if anyone would love to come onto the stream and speak, definitely let us know. Me, Alan Helton, James Eastham, Andres Moreno, we all organize getting speakers what they need. And if you're not sure of what topic you might want to do, we also spitball that as well. And you can do different formats. Like I did the standard, PowerPoint and talking, but you could also do like a fireside chat. We've done that in the past. We've done Q&As with, someone on the screen asking the guest questions and just kind of more conversational. We could also do like a panel, or if you have any other ideas, we are definitely open to other formats, whatever you're most comfortable with, as long as you have a fireplace. That's mandatory. But yeah, definitely be thinking about that. And happy holidays if you celebrate the holidays. I know I will be taking the rest of the year off and just looking forward to 2026 with you all. I'm going to end the stream now. Thanks everyone for joining. It was great to virtually see you all, and I hope to see some of you in person and virtually again. See you later.